Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I get to talk to my buddy Katharine Schellman about Last Dance Before Dawn. Welcome back, Katharine.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's always such a pleasure. You get the distinction of being the one author I've interviewed the most.
Really?
Yes.
That's fun.
It is a lot of fun. So you bring us back to the world of The Nightingale, set in the 1920s. Can you give the audience a little overview of what this book is about?
Sure. So the Nightingale series, they're mystery set in 1920s New York City, so during Prohibition. But instead of focusing on sort of the upper class, Great Gatsby kind of characters, I'm looking at the working class characters who are actually, the ones working at the speakeasies and keeping things running, and sort of the criminal underworld that they end up being part of by default, whether they really want to be or not, just because of proximity and profession. So for this one in particular, we're looking at the Nightingale itself, which has been a central hub for all these characters. As the Nightingale is being threatened in this one, there's a chance that it won't be able to stay open, that the people who work there are in danger specifically because they work there. So the main character, Vivian, is essentially trying to protect her found family and trying to remove the threat to them there.
One of the things that Vivian points out a couple of times in this book is the fact that the Nightingale has become her home. Mm-hmm. And I think for those of us who've read this series, it has become our home as well, because we feel like we know the characters and we feel like we're invested in them, obviously. You give us a great cast of characters that run the gamut from A to Z. And in this one, so just before we started recording, I did say to Katharine, I wanted to talk about this. So this is the fourth and final book in this series. So give the audience an idea of what goes through an author's mind, good, bad, or indifferent, when you know you're doing the last one of a series.
Well, it helped for this that I knew basically from the beginning that this was not going to be more than 4 books in this series. I knew when I was talking to the editor who bought them from Minotaur, which is my publisher, she's asking what I was picturing. And I said, if it's a series, 3 or 4 books max. Like I had a very specific sort of personal arc that I wanted to take the main character through. And I knew that it would take 3 or 4 books. I didn't have a lot of mystery series can go on very indefinitely. And that's a lot of fun, I think, when you just get to, you have these characters that you like and you just get to stay with them for a long time. But for this one, I knew that Vivian had a specific journey that she was going to go on in terms of sort of her sense of herself and her sense of the place in the world and these people that she was in community with and in relationship with. And I had a sense of what that big picture journey was. There's always a chance as you're writing that you will discover things that surprise you, or you'll write yourself into a little bit of a corner, or you'll have an idea of this character, but then you get to the end of a book and you think, oh, they have ended up in a completely different place than I expected, and trying to go in the direction that I thought I was going in the next book would actually not make sense with the way this character has ended up now. So you never know exactly what's going to happen, but I did know going into this series that it was not going to be more than 4 books. And that helped because I had a sense of where I needed to get my characters sort of in each book. But then going into this one, it was really hard to sit down and start writing it, both because I love these characters and I love this world so much. And giving them a final outing felt really, really sad in a lot of ways, just to say, like, this is going to be it. But it's also very stressful because you have readers telling you how much these characters mean to them and how much they love spending time with them, and you want it to be satisfying. You can only write the story that you have in you and that you are able to write, but you hope it really resonates with other people too. And you have to block out that worry while you're writing as much as possible, so you can just focus on the writing. But it's always there a little bit because you're getting the story out and just praying that other people are going to think it's a good ending to everything. No, you're never going to make everyone happy. There's always going to be
Of
Yeah,
course, there'll be a little bit of that. I suspect eventually you and your husband will find out what it's like when your kids go off to college, because you're sort of saying goodbye to these characters. I remember when I got the first pitch from your publicist, Sarah, about your first book. And I remember thinking, oh, I like this. I'm a big jazz fan. So, of course, the naming of the songs that were popular in the 20s and was fun to read, and reacquaint with, oh, yes, that did come out in 1919 or whatever year it came out. So that was a lot of fun. And your books, especially this series, have a lot of movement in them, both inside and outside of the Nightingale. I mean, the Nightingale is a bar, a speakeasy, and a dance club. There's a singer. And so there's a lot of movement inside and outside. Was the choreographing of the movements easy for you, or is that challenging for you?
I think that's very fun for me, because one of my first careers was as an actor and dancer. I used to do stage performance, and I used to do a lot of dancing. And I actually did a lot of social swing dancing as a hobby. So a lot of sort of the dance styles that were begun in this era. So figuring out how to represent that on the page in writing was a lot of fun, because I could picture in my mind what these characters were doing, and then also figuring out how to sort of work with not just make it like, oh, and now they're dancing, but it's part of the story. You're seeing the relationships develop, and you're seeing these tensions and these conflicts being expressed through how they're moving, because that's what I was used to doing on stage. So having a chance to actually do it in a written form, it was a challenge, but it was very fun. And it kind of felt like, oh, like this is putting that skill set to use that I didn't know if I'd be using again.
Well, and I think for us, the readers, it's a lot of fun too, because there is a lot of movement, and it is, as you touched on earlier, there's an underworld aspect and component to your books, and so there's movement with that. There's both legal and illegal moving of things, and so I think that it just sort of fired all the pistons for me, because it gave us a lot of fun. We get to be involved with them. We get to see New York in the 20s. And because it's a speakeasy, a majority of it takes place at night, which is always very interesting, because you've got shadows and dark, and, obviously sunshine's important, but there are all these things that are moving in the dark. And I think that keeps the suspense ratcheted up as well. One thing, so late in the book, Vivian and Leo go up to the Bronx, and I just love the description of the sparseness of the Bronx. I don't think that could be said nowadays.
No.
I mean, the Bronx is anything but sparse at this point, but in the 20s, it really was rather sparse.
It was, I wouldn't say quite rural, but it was definitely at the edge of New York City. Like it was technically New York, but not really. Like it wasn't downtown. It wasn't part of the city. And that actually changed very rapidly in the 30s. So in the decade immediately following, because they just suddenly needed so much more housing for people.
Yes.
But it was very interesting to, dive into different historical records and see, here's a newspaper image that shows this area they're going to, and it's empty.
No, right?
Just empty.
I mean, if you read books set in like early 1900s, you will find that there were tons of mansions out in the Bronx, but not high rises like there are now. I mean, there are just hundreds of high rises in the Bronx, whereas, back in the early 1900s, there weren't. So that was a fun thing to see, and a fun thing to be reminded of, that it's very different. So when we start the series, the first book, Vivian and her sister Florence have just become 18, and they've been sort of put out of the orphanage they were in. Did you know that in book 4 there would be a return to the orphanage? Or did that develop along the way?
That developed along the way. That was a real surprise to me, in terms of, because there was a particular character I knew what that character's storyline with Vivian, how that was going to turn out. But I didn't know what their individual storyline was going to be. I think everyone needs their own arc. You can't just have like, here's your relationship with the main character. You want them to feel like these full people who are not just orbiting around this one real person. You want everyone to have their real life that feels like it stretches beyond the pages of the book. And so figuring out how this character's individual story ended, that's what took us to the orphanage. That's what took us outside the city that little bit. And that was very cool to dive into because I'd had that peppered through in terms of like, oh, Vivian and Florence, they talk about the orphanage a little bit. It gets mentioned, but I hadn't really had a chance to dive into that. So I had to do a lot of research into, what would an orphanage be like in that time period? What would the experience of the kids living there have been? What were adoption practices like in that era? And it was interesting to research and interesting to see where records were missing in terms of just the amount of sort of secrecy and shame that was felt around those things. And I think a lot of those stigmas still exist now. And that's one of the things that I find so interesting about a lot of historical research is, you see what has changed and you see what hasn't changed. And it can get a little dark sometimes.
Well, I agree. And I think that that's one of the things that in giving each of your characters an arc that was done very well and very purposeful is the fact that, at the end, Vivian is able to say with a great assurance that it doesn't have to be a bad life. Growing up in an orphanage doesn't have to be a bad life. It may not be the most perfect life, but it doesn't have to be a bad life, which is sort of a huge arc for her from where we started with Vivian. And that's not her only arc. There are plenty of arcs in Vivian's life, which we don't want to get into too many spoilers. So, but it's a lot of fun. And it was very reassuring because in a lot of ways you gave us a little bit of romance at the end of this novel. And when I say romance, I mean, you sort of did nicely tidy up everyone's life. And in a way that was realistic is the same way. Because I think what you said, we can't just have one orbit around Vivian or the Nightingale only. Each of them have their own lives. Even Danny goes his own way. And he's been a character from book one. So, and it was fun, as I said early on, that we got to hang out with these characters through 4 books, and they're fun characters. They're flawed characters, as we all are, except me. I'm perfect, of course. Lord, I'm not even close to perfect. So, I don't even come in the orbit of perfect. But anyway, but it has been a lot of fun. It really has. And it's important to note, because I always do like to note this when I talk to an author who's written in a series, that this book stands alone on its own. You can read book 4 first and book 2 second, and third the first, and the fourth the third. It doesn't really matter because they all stand on their own completely.
That's definitely the goal with this. I wanted, you get I think if you read like 1 to 4 in order, you get the whole arc of the relationships in order, but I wanted each book to feel very satisfying if you picked it up on its own. I think that's one thing that's really nice about mysteries is that they do have such self-contained stories. And for this one, I wanted to try and do something a little bit different with the mystery, even because a lot of the other books that I've written, they end up being whodunits. Someone dies at the beginning and you're trying to figure out who did it the whole time you're following the set of clues. And this one, it's a very different structure because you know who done it from the beginning. He shows up at the Nightingale like, okay, it's me.
Right. It's me. That's right. No surprise, really. I mean, only a surprise that you showed up.
Right. So you're not trying to figure out who he is, but you're trying to figure out what he wants and how to get rid of him. And that's the challenge these characters are facing. So that was another thing that was very fun about getting to the 4th one in the series is saying, how can I make this, not just a satisfying part of the series, but a satisfying book on its own that feels different from the first ones, that feels interesting to someone who's just picking it up, having not read the other ones. And you still get, the tension between Honor and Vivian, which is just the most fun relationship to write. And you get these characters who I hope at least that you have a real good sense of who they are from the very first page, even if you haven't read the other ones. You get the fun interpersonal drama. And as you said, all the terrible, imperfect, very messy decisions that they all make. And I think I hope that comes across as very satisfying to readers, even if they haven't read the other ones in the series.
I agree. I think it does. It definitely did for me. One of the lovely things you did, Katharine, is so Vivian and her sister Florence grew up in an orphanage, yet a lot of the other characters have full families. And what I love is the fact that the families are so accepting of Vivian. Bee's mom keeps her some, so to speak. And when I say keeps, I mean just accepts them. Right. Danny's parents accept them. it's a really lovely thing. And I just love the fact that you did a name play. May and May. I thought that was so cute, so clever, and so well done.
I liked it. I did take it to my editor and say, like, is this too cutesy? Like, is this? But all those families that pop up all over the place, that I think I discovered while I was writing this, and this shouldn't have been a surprise, but I think in so many ways, like it's a story, it's a series about family, and I think in a lot of ways, all queer stories are about family and about finding family, or reconciling with, or being able to leave behind your family of origin, and
right.
if you need to, and creating your family of choice. Like, I think that's such a strong part of the experience of being a queer person, trying to figure yourself out and existing in the world. And then all the different ways that happened in these books. Some of them happened by accident, like you were talking about Danny's family, and sort of the ways that they create space for Vivian and Florence. Not originally, like, because when they first met, they're very skeptical of them. Like, they don't want them there. That feels like trouble to them. But they do create space for them, and they do bring them into the family, even when Vivian's not she openly says, like, I don't know how to deal with that. I don't know how to be part of a family like this, because I never have been. But it still ends up becoming part of who she sees as her family and her home. And that's, that was really, really lovely to explore, and to be able to create that for a character who, when I started writing the first book, I didn't know where she was going to end up and where she was going to find that family. And it turned out there were a lot of places for that to exist.
Yes. And, the term protection comes to mind. Vivian finds that she's protected by quite a few people who end up loving her. And that's a lovely thing, because, I mean, while she's had to create a world of her own in a lot of ways, I find that oftentimes we create, or we attract to us, those people who really do want to protect us. Right. I don't think that the majority of humans are surrounded by evil and people who want to destroy them. I think that, as humans, we attract those people we need to us to help protect us and to keep us as safe as possible. Things happen in real life, just as they do in fiction. Things go wrong, things go bump in the night. But I do think that you showed really quite a bit of protection of Vivian, and of the people that she chose to hang out with, and the people she chose to love, and allow them to love her as well.
I think that's what you just said right at the end there. People she chose to love, the people she allows to love her. That was a big journey for her in this, to, yes. For her and Florence, coming out of an upbringing where they didn't have a family, where they were cared for because, the people who were running the orphanage were raising them and doing the best by them that they could, but it wasn't necessarily a loving, emotionally supportive environment. And I think that's another thing for a lot of queer folks, is you have to learn how to accept the vulnerability that comes with opening up to other people and creating those relationships, and and trusting that that if you love them, they will love you back. And that's a real journey that Vivian goes on.
Well, it is. And then I think also, she also learns that there are certain people she cannot trust. Unfortunately, some of her relatives come back into her life in this book, and it's very clear that while they might have had some good motives, maybe not, they certainly didn't have her best interest at heart.
Yeah.
And it's like I said, some decisions were made, good, bad, or indifferent, but it's very, in that way, her biological family wasn't nearly as loving and supportive as her found family.
Right. She had this this image in her mind of, like, if I could just find, if I could figure out what happened to my mom, if I could figure out what happened to my dad, if I could see if there's an extended family out there, maybe that fixes everything, right? Like, maybe that's the answer to everything. Maybe that solves everything that feels like it's lacking or missing or hurting in my life. And, if only that were true for any of us, right?
At 100%. There's some of my relatives that I just rather not see because I know them.
Right. But I mean, even if you do end up with a family that you have a good, loving relationship with, like that, it can't fix everything, right?
No,
It can't. You have to be willing to, still find that vulnerability and that community and that love and share that, accept it and share it back. And that's a really hard process for anyone to go through.
I agree with you, Katharine. So what's next for you? Now, just before you answer that question, just so we're clear, Last Dance Before Dawn is out now. It's available for ordering or on the bookshelves. Go find it everywhere. So now I'll ask you, what's up next?
Well, it's interesting. So this is the first time in a while, because I've been publishing 2 books a year, I think, which is why we've chatted so much
right.
in the last few
You've been
years.
Busy.
Yes. So I've been publishing 2 books a year for a while now. This is the first time I've had a book come out where I haven't been in the middle of writing the next one, which is actually very lovely. I'm discovering to just be able to focus on I'm doing events, I'm doing chats like this, and actually getting to talk about this thing that I put so much time into and I'm so proud of. So it's nice to be able to focus on that a little bit and not be racing towards a deadline for once. But I do have a couple things I am working on. I'm trying to not do such, I mean, they're mystery adjacent, I would say, but they're not strict mystery. So one of them is a dual timeline kind of creepy old Southern house and a wealthy family with secrets, and the outsider who comes in and actually accidentally starts uncovering those secrets. So it's got a bit of that Southern Gothic mystery vibe to it, which is a lot of fun to play with. And then the other one is, again, leaning a little more into that Southern mystery side of things. It's a small town with various secrets and a slightly fantastical edge to it. So both mystery adjacent, but playing a little bit more with, sort of bringing in some other genres, I think. So it kind of is both of them are a little cross genre, and that's been really fun to explore, just to be doing something a little different.
Good. Secrets and lies are always fun because they're wonderful to unpack. It gives you plenty of things to hide and little Easter eggs to find along the way.
Yes, for sure.
Absolutely. Again, the book is Last Dance Before Dawn. Thank you so much, Katharine, for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. It's always such a fun time to talk with you.
Thank you. Same here. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.